Mas Usul udah berapa orang ya online-nya? Mulai aja ya. Chevy kayak lagi di luar gitu. Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the CSO discussion on CBDF, Cross-Border Data Flows, a side events by SUP Working Group on Digitalizations. My name is Rachel Judistari from the SUP Working Group of Digitalizations and Wikimedia Foundations. Apologize for the background noise. I think we will try our best to be more noisy than the next room. So, selamat pagi semuanya. Exactly. So, silakan Pak. In the next 2 hours, we will have discussions on cross-border data flows. As you know, as part of the DEWG, the Digital Economy Working Group, part of G20, in the beginning of September, discussing about the thematic priorities that they want to have in G20 Summit in November, and cross-border data flows, along with the post-pandemic recovery as well as digital literacy, was identified as key priorities. However, this discourse of cross-border data flows is very new to even the member of sub-working group of digitalizations. Therefore, we want to have a conversations to unpack what should be protected within the practice of just cross-border data flow, especially on the privacy rights, but also how we can ensure that there is a just economic transfer among the global South countries within G20. As we know, data is the new oil. However, harmful business models of the big tech also compromise the privacy rights of users around the world. And because of that, the sub-working group on digitalization have tried to distill some of the key recommendations that we want to provide to the G20 leaders. But we need your help to get more insight. If you have further resonating input to the recommendations, or perhaps you want to challenge the idea, because tomorrow we will have high-level dialogue with the DEWG members from Indonesia, South Africa, and hopefully India. So with us today, we will have 3 speakers who are also part of the sub-working group on digitalizations members. We have Shefi from LSAM. We also have Parminder Jet from IT for Change, who are also the co-chair of our working group. And last but not least, we have Olisias from HINT. So each of the speakers will tell you about what has been discussed internally within the sub-working group. And then in the upcoming 1 hour, we will have interactive discussions. If you have any questions, clarifications, further ideas to substantiate our talking points with the members of the EWG tomorrow. So without further ado, I want to check if we are okay in terms of technicalities, Mas Muslim. Okay. So I also would like to welcome all of you here, participants of C20 Summit, who are also, I see some of the members of the Education, Civic Space, and Digitalization Working Group. Thank you so much for your contributions. If you want to know more about our working group, you can find the briefing pack of our thematic priorities issues outside the room. But also we have online participants join us today. So Mas Muslim will help me to gather additional questions and inputs from online participants. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Shafi to share about what has been discussed internally within the SOAP working group, especially on data protections and privacy rights, in lieu with the cross-border data flows. And after that, we will have Parminder and also Alicia's share additional thoughts on that. So Shafi, floor is yours. You'll have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And also, we provide an interpreter, Mbak Rachel, and all of you guys. So, who want to hear the conversation in Indonesia, you can also join the Zoom meeting and can choose Bahasa Indonesia as your language. Thank you so much, Mbak Rachel, and all of you guys for the opportunity in this morning. And I will talk about a human rights-based approach to cross-border data flows. I will talk about specifically right to privacy, and but Parminder and also Bang Olis will address specifically about the right to economic, as we know that both of the aspect, economic and non-economic, is important thing when we talk about the cross-border data flows. The first one, as we know that when talk about the right to privacy, this right is actually protected by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and also the ICCPR, or International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And as we know, in our G20 countries, we have already protected that in our constitution and our legislation on regulation. For the example, in Indonesia, we have protected that in our constitution, and I believe that Parminder also can share how it goes in India. And also, when we talk about the right to privacy, maybe I can just move there to make it clear. Wait. In 2010, actually, Professor Munir from Malaysia divided that into 4 of the categories. The first one is informational privacy, bodily privacy, and also privacy of communications and territorial privacy. And what I really want to talk is actually about the informational privacy that will address a personal data protection, actually. So the implication of cross-border data flows vary by data type, including commercial data, government data, and consumer data. And each data type has the possibility of containing personal data. This is one of our concern because when we talk about personal data, this is a data that can identify us directly or indirectly, and also online or offline, and combined with the other personal data or not, so it will be called as personal data. And that is also including a sensitive data, which require or demand a higher protections. So we really want to address this concern in cross-border data flows. And also, in fact, the existence of comprehensive personal data protection legislation is an important pillar on that, because we know that one of the key things when we talk about the data protection of CBDF is talking about the trust from the subject data, because we know that there will be some kind of there is something like data breach in Indonesia or on the other country, and some kind of unauthorized of the use of the data that will give an effect to the subject data. So the discussion of personal data protection of our right to privacy as a subject data is the thing that really matter to cross-border data flows. And when we compare to G20 countries, talking about Indonesia, we have actually passed our personal data protection bill in about 2 weeks ago, and it made Indonesia as the 16th country in the G20 countries that have the personal data protection. It is important because when we talk about personal data, it's require a high of the protection which put in the legislation to give a really binding legislation and regulation to protect our personal data. And also, despite of the passed of the Personal Data Protection Act 2 weeks ago, we as civil society in Indonesia already have a concern. There is a 10 notes that we critique about this, and one of them is actually about the Data Protection Authority. We believe that the implementation of the data protection is require a really high of the supervising by the Data Protection Authority. And the research by Graham Greenleaf from the Australia said that one of the requirement to have a good implementation of personal data protection is how the building of the Data Protection Authority. And the fact that the personal data protection law in Indonesia that put the DPA as below the control of the government is one thing that we really want to discuss too, because the independence of the authority will give an impact to the effectiveness of the personal data protection law. And when we also talk about the personal data protection law, it's actually a really important discussion when we talk about the cross-border data flows, as I mentioned before, because this is one of the substantive and also following by the infrastructure that we should have, because the data will transfer cross-border. So it's important to make sure that the protection of the personal data protection in each country is adequate, so it will protect our personal data as the part of right to privacy. And also when we see in the EU GDPR, also as the part of G20 countries, we know that the transfer of personal data is basically allowed, but they require some kind of the adequacy and also the thing that should be following what the regulation that have already regulated by the EU GDPR. So this is important that to make sure how the regulation and legislation in the third country and also to the other country when one of this country want to transfer the data cross-border. And when we're reflecting that in Indonesia, especially in our new personal data protection law, we knew that there is 3 leveling of that. The first one, when Indonesia want to transfer the data to the other country, it should require an adequate personal data protection in the other country that the Indonesia would like to transfer the data. But that's not a merely thing that can do when there is a transfer data, but there is a second option. When there is no adequate personal data protection, it can use an appropriate and binding personal data protection, which can be controlled by the controller and also the processor. And when there is no adequate personal data and also appropriate and binding personal data, the data will also can be transferred to the other country outside Indonesia with the subject data's consent. So there will be some kind of 3 leveling of this when we talk about our new personal data protection. And this is maybe the thing that Parminder also Bang Olis can talk more about this, but the government access to data, however, it ought to be conducted in a manner in compliance with the human rights limitation, widely known as the 3 partes, because we knew that the collection, for the example of or the localization of the data without a good infrastructure of the protection of personal data, which will be harm for the subject data. For the example, there is a MR5 in Indonesia that will also very danger for our freedom of expression, because they will directly easily to know how the one that talk or criticize about the government or some kind like that. Because when we talk about data, it's not actually merely about the collection from the private sector, but also the government sector. So it's also important to make sure how the infrastructure of the government for the personal data protection, because we know, for the example, in Indonesia, there are so many data breach happen, and who else get the very bad impact on that? That's us as subject data. And the current laws and regulation across countries show that there are different approach regarding the type of data that can be transmitted across borders. Accompanied with its data localization condition, for example, some countries prohibit data with certain criteria to be transferred abroad, while other countries allow it as long as copies are kept locally, such as data related to financial and tax regulations. So there are so many different approaches on that. So we can discuss that here because it's very important for us to bring a really good idea to our DEWG or Digital Economy Working Group that we will talk tomorrow. So we can discuss this in here. Okay. And according to our policy brief, we have identified some of the challenges or issue and also recommendations that we will share to you about this. The first one is actually any regulatory attempt on cross-border data flows needs to really consider the multidimensional nature of data, which we believe that it should be includes both economic and non-economic dimension. It's including the right to privacy, freedom of expression, and also the right to economic that will share more by Parminder and also Bang Louis. And with regard to economic development, we know that the unequal distribution of benefit of cross-border data flows, which currently is concentrated between a few countries and global tech company, need to be addressed. It is crucial to ensure that the economic value generated by cross-border data flows are able to be reaped by all, including developing countries, because we know that the big tech company has already developed in the North country and with the South country don't really get a really big impact on that collection or of data. So this is the discussion that we can address more. And actually, beyond economic value, from a development lens, the public good nature of data has implications also beyond national borders. Health data sharing for research purpose during the COVID-19, for example, is one instance in which cross-border data flows can be beneficial. And I think it's also important when we talk about cross-border data flows, we know that there is a personal data, but there is also non-personal data things or aggregate data. So it will also need a different approach and also perspective to processing and also transferring that data, of course. And also with regard to its non-economic dimension, cross-border data flows also have its implication towards human rights, particularly privacy that we have discussed last. Privacy implication of cross-border data flows vary by data type, as I mentioned before. So it should be addressed specifically on that. And privacy risks come not only from the private sector, but also from the public sector that I've mentioned before, and it affects the trust and hinder potential benefits of a data-driven digital economy. Not only that global standards are urgently needed, but it also needs to be accompanied by effective oversight mechanism that operates independently. In this context is Data Protection Authority, which should be independent, not under one of the branch, which is executive, for example, in Indonesia, because we know that the scope, the subject scope of the personal data protection is not merely in the private sector, but also in the public sector. I can imagine how it can be supervised by one of the subject that will be supervised by this institution, so it will surely ineffective. And from that, this is my last slide, and this is the 3 recommendations that we bring when we talk about the cross-border data flows. The first one is data privacy and protection. And data privacy and protection have to be basic to all data laws and agreements. So this is not only in the national level, but also in the international level, such as the trade or some kind of agreements. There are both individual and collective aspect of privacy. A robust data protection framework should put...
Sorry, if we can wrap up because time is up. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is my last slide, Mbak Rachel. Okay, a robust data protection framework should put the control of data firmly in the hands of the individual as data subjects, I believe, because they are the one who actually hold the data because they are data subject. And the second one is equitable distribution of benefits from data and economic rights to data. Maybe I can give this to Parminder to share more about this, about the economic rights. And the last one is ensure that global data governance should not be decided by international trade rules. Therefore, we need to develop just global digital and data governance framework with an independent, representative multilateral mechanism backed by an international treaty based on human rights or and including economic rights, because we knew that a dialogue that really multi-stakeholder is important on this, because there are so many aspects that we really want to address in this discourse. So I think I will stop here and discuss that in the next session. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Sefi. I can see from the face of participants here, there are so many burning questions and also response. So I really urge speakers to kind of like stick to the time. But thank you so much for the important presentation, Sefi. Parminder always actually asked me to present first, if that's okay, so that you can give like a wrap up. But as Sefi mentions, data is the new oil. The nature of extractivist data mining, which solely controlled by the global North Tech the company, is at the margin of lack of people controls in the global south, especially on our data governance and also data sovereignty. And because of that, after Chevy mentions a lot about the protection of privacy, it is also important for us in the G20 countries, especially those from the global south, to really take into account what should be the decentralization's strategies, so that we can fully benefit of the utilization of data to achieve better economic justice and systems. So with this, Mas Olisias from Hint will share with us the context on economic justice to cross-border data flows. And again, please hold your breath if you have resonating views, or if you have completely different understanding or disagreement, you will have the space to hash that out after the presentations. So please, Mas Oli.
Okay, thank you, and sorry for Parminder. I think because I will talk more generally and you have more updates, so I think better you speak after me. So thank you. Thank you all. I would like to discuss about the cross-border data flow. This is one perspective, actually in the economic perspective, but I know it's not only about economy, but they are wider and wider. So it's like what the digital is going through. So I start from the what happened in Indonesia. I think is one thing that we can learn. Sorry. Yes. This is one of the response of digital development in Indonesia about e-commerce. I think this is general data that we know that right now there are about 2,300 startups in Indonesia, and now Indonesia is the fifth biggest in the world. Several years ago is third, but now going to fifth because I think India or some country they are growing more faster. But this shows how the Indonesia responds to the digitals, how to use the facilitating on digitals. This is another thing that we know also. Indonesia is going fast from 4 unicorn, I'm sorry, to now is about 12 unicorn, and now there are some decacorn. What we can see here is there are a lot of people involved. They are using this facility. They are using these digital facilitations, like in Traveloka. For now, it's about 1 million per day. People using it. Gojek, there are about 3.7 million people as a driver. In Tokopedia, there's 11 million merchants, 100 million active users. In Bukalapak, there are 14 million merchants. So, I mean, this is a huge people involved in this develop of the digitals. And from that, we also have to know that there are a big capital inside. They are playing, sometimes we don't recognize them. So this is some that you can see that there are some, a group of capital, they are staying in the, I mean, they have some different company and etc. So they are another part that we never see that. So now it's about 12. And yes, this is what the things, there is a change globally related uh, to the digitals. I said here that a large company have started using digital application to control data related to input, production, and sales, research, and export. I give a sample for the agricultures. In agricultures, it's not, I'm sorry, it's not about only private data, but all the data related to the activity in agriculture. And they are transferred freely, without regulation, without protections, they are freely. So what happened then is not only for the government, but also to the farmers, customers for their living needs, production practice with consuming partners. So this is one sample that we know and related to us. Whatever we eat, we buy in our activities. So now they are the data, the information. So you cannot do for how to develop the good agriculture in the countries. Who have the data about it? So I think that's one of the question. And this is only one sample from many samples. So another side, I would like to show that how the WTO and free trade agreements, name of CEPA, they do a liberalization, they make a proposal to liberalization. What they ask, of course, they ask make a contract, authentication, e-signature, is things. The second one, they ask for open cross-border data flow. They want the data is freely crossing the countries because it's have a good economic values there. The second one, they ask for less data protection because the data protection is a burden for them. So, you know, there are some cases like now, like in the health, we do collecting, we use it, but they collect the data, but who knows they transfer the data. Of course, there is a regulation, but we have to do more than that because the cross-border data flow means 1 second you got it, 1 second they transfer, 1 second they process, and then it's changed. I think Pramila can talk about it more. The second one is about no data localization. Of course, they ask no data localization. They make a big arguments. The localization is not anti-development and extra and extra. But of course, we have a different perspective. Localization data mean that you have to build the infrastructures in one country, especially in the developing country. So it's giving something economically. But of course, there is a big debate about it. Closed source code algorithm. This is about another issue, and I think that will be raised as a new big issue in the future about cross-border, about source code. Source code is a secret. The secrets only the company and God knows. No one knows because you cannot access it, protect it in the name of IPR, in the name of secrets of business. So I think that's the thing. The other thing is no local presence. So they don't need to local presence. Okay, what the reality? I highlight a three reality about what happened in the digitals developing now. People globally have lack of access to digital, depend on countries' ability infrastructures. Yes, countries, they are different. Some they have infrastructure, some not, some depend. And of course, it's giving an opportunity to create who can dominate. But if they're doing with who the dominant control and regulate it, and then we can see there is a unjust situation that we have facing on. People with their historical background, environment of living have different ways to state and protect their interests, even in a democratic process. I mean, everybody in the world as a nation, as a community, they have a different historical backgrounds. They have a different situation, what they're facing on, the environment they are living, and they have decide what to do with them, with their interests. They have an interest. They have to protect them. But what happened now? They want to put it all the things in the same rules openly, so they don't put the people interest in that system. So I think that's one thing that we have to also mention about. Big companies, that's another thing. Big company, the capital driven, by the capital driven or competitions, have an interest to dominate the digital activities, especially economics. So I think I mentioned for these 3 points to understand what happens in the. So cross-border data flow itself, I put some point here. What are related issues? Of course, like Siva already told about the privacy data. Yes, for Indonesian, we appreciate that finally, after I think about 6 years, the process there finally, can you imagine the up and down out from the parliament, get the parliament, and finally they are doing that after the signs of many free trade agreements. Yes, the privacy, but I think in my opinion, privacy is not enough because this is about the big things. Security. If you know about the Snowden leaks, the story how the against you in America, they wrapping the company's data were in Africa, in America. So I think is by the government's agency, and they took it because the server is in America and they have access. They're under the authority of America. They can do that. So it's one thing to show how the security is very fragile if we don't have a good regulation, a strong regulation about it. I'm sorry, this is Indonesia. I'm sorry, I don't put it, but there's how to regulate, how to do the regulation in the countries. Like I told you, as a sovereign nation, you make your own rules, but it cannot be implemented because when the server is out, you cannot do anything. And otherwise, if you have a rules, that's very, very difficult. It's also happened in America. You know, in 2008, when they have a crisis, they cannot do anything to access the server because the server is in Hong Kong. And people in Hong Kong, they shut down the servers and they cannot access it. They cannot do anything. So it is the other things that shows that how the security and how to regulation, the general regulation cannot be implemented. Also tax, I think in the text, they already talk about it. Tax is very important. When you put the tax, who have the duct, and the regulation of finance regulation, I mean. Also cross-border data flow related to the data localizations. Yes, that's like a pair, but of course they are not, should be like that, but there will be big discussion. The data localizations need to guarantee, to make a fix security. And the other thing is about source code issues. Source code issues about the bias, like I told you, health data or cars data. Can you imagine cars, wherever you go, they cannot, they collect all the data and etc. So I think that's another issues. Yes, there are a lot of issue to govern the data. Yeah, first is to protect people as a persons, protect communities as activities and economics, protect country and state to develop and service to people interest. This is one of the things sometimes we forget, that state, otherwise whatever they are, people they have a opportunity to change something in under the countries. So they have, and the countries have to develop and give the services to the people. And data needed to be treated differently from conventional goods and services also. It's not, because data is beyond that. Data is not about information only, but it's also a commodity. It's also a good, and getting more and wider, especially in international transfers. The next context of data-driven digital economy, ownership, sovereignty are being reconcepts. So we cannot do the old concepts. What the sovereignty what the place mean, and etc. In data, we need the reconcept about it. Democratic process should be involved to regulate the data, like who owns rights to access and protection control, and etc. and etc. Process creating the regulations should involve people with their specific need and background. So I think that's a point that, yeah, this is the things, and I hope I write on time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you as always. I just want to add, I think in the sub-working group, we are not only talking about source code, but also how content should be free. Free knowledge is also one of the key thematic priorities of our sub-working group, because we don't want that to be capitalized, as it's also part of the public goods, especially for educational content. And as Mas Olis mentions, data localization has become a very icy issues within our sub-working group, because we are also aware of how the global shrinking civic space allowing authoritarian regime to use data localizations to increase surveillance tactics that hinder the freedom of speech for human rights defenders, which leads to criminalization in some contexts. So how, this is very interesting discussions to have, because we want the data decentralizations to be happen, but also not to forgetting safeguard for human rights defenders that are working tirelessly in all parts of the world, especially in the global south. And with that, I'm sure that Parminder, as the co-chair of our working group, would be able to provide more insight on how we should balance this different context, different interests, and the nuance of newly developed concepts such as cross-border data flows. And after Parminder, I will open the floor to you. So hopefully you can write down your comments, making sure that we will have a lively discussion after this. Parminder, floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachin. Yeah, so I understand that you would have heard of data largely in terms of data protection, and that's where data privacy law, data protection, and Olis has already started discussing beyond it, and I'll be talking more about economics around data, and in that context, cross-border data flows, and I'll try to put a timer, though I hardly observe time ever. So, okay, you are sitting in a G20 context. What is a way to find out what is the most important issue at a conference? There could be different ways. One could be where most people go. You can see there's a lot of crowd, a lot of people trying to attend that particular group, and that's way to know that that issue is important. Other is like people are very emotional, they give statements, and that's how the issue is important. And one other way to find out what is the most important issue is where it is most difficult to find an agreement. That's the one way to find out, because easy issues find easy agreements. Not to say that anything like access to medicine, etc., is easy, but at least at a higher level, people are able to get an agreement, right? In all these areas. One area where there is no agreement in G20 today, which is the most important area where there is no agreement, is cross-border data flows. The ministers met on 1st of September. Now, this is not an agreement about details that may be true to access to medicine and so on as well. Even on the higher level language, even the term, like there's a data free flow with trust. And you would be surprised that developing countries don't agree to that term. Isn't it funny? Developing countries don't agree to a term called data free flow with trust. So you can understand how much is hidden out here. I'll go back and forth and probably come back and respond to your questions. There's lots to talk about here. Data localization, and Rachel was talking about in authoritarian countries, and let me go to the heart of the issue. Yes, we don't want our states to access our data. We don't want an authoritarian government. But is the escape from that is to subject ourselves to the regimes of outside countries? Is it that the way? So when people say data localization, and there is this paper which we have written and put in front of you. The first part of that paper is bringing the rule of law to cross-border data flows. It's not an issue of localization. It's an issue of bringing something under rule of law. Now, data earlier, 10 years back, used to be some one thing. I mean, people said that doesn't matter if data is flowing freely. It's a new thing. If law cannot access data, that's okay. But today, data both reflects all parts of the society, all parts, and impacts all parts of the society. And you would all agree, good governments or bad governments, before that, a society has to be under rule of law. You'd all agree, right? The second question of bad governments come after accepting that we have to be under rule of law. Now, if we have to be under rule of law, it's obvious that data has to be under rule of law. Now, once we agree, and you can disagree at any point, that data has to be under a rule of law, then third point is whose rule of law data should be. Should be your country, should be President Biden's country, or where? And that's your choice. I would say I have a problem with my government. I know you would have a problem with your governments, but I still would have the rule of law of my government over things which are associated with me. And that's the simple reason localization is spoken about. And I know there is a capture of narrative and say localization is the worst thing possible. It's simply rule of law. And we are not against free flow of data. You protect our rights as the data flows. We are happy to let the data flow. For example, financial transactions. I don't have money to put in Swiss banks, but if I had it, I could put money in Swiss banks because I know that money is safe because there are international rules which tell me that my money in Swiss bank cannot be taken away by X guy. You give me good rules which protects the interests of developing countries, and we are happy to have free flow of data. So data localization is nothing but this. Tomorrow, you'll be talking to a South African official. Probably I shouldn't quote him, but Sudhir, who's head of the multilateral division in the trade ministry, had this observation to make at one of our meetings. You probably know that at the WTO, developing countries have been asking for waiver to WTO agreement so that they can produce vaccines at home. You would have heard of that. And they are not able to get waivers. He said, in 20 years, I don't want to be in a situation where South Africa is wanting to do a digital health intervention to protect another wave of pandemic which may have come, but we can't do it because all our health data is in the US, and we are begging for our own data to be given back to us because we want to do a digital health intervention. So basically, data localization is to have rights over one's data, to be able to use it to their own benefit. And before that, as I said, a basic issue of rule of law. I'm touching some top level issues, but let me try to figure out what data is. You really seriously get the idea why there's so much talk about data? I mean, we normally think the main problem with data is that some companies are getting to know so much about us and then they exploit us. Now that's where most of the knowledge ends, basically. And that's pretty fine. But the problem here is that it's not just our personal data. The most valuable commodity today is data, and it is valuable not because data itself can be used. If I handed over you a bucket of data, what are you going to do with it? Data itself is not useful. What is useful is the intelligence which is squeezed out of data. It may be artificial intelligence or lesser forms of intelligence. So data is a raw material. It's not data which is useful. If I give you a room full of data, or I say, this is the keys to a data center, take the keys. I don't know what you're going to do about that. The problem is those people who can squeeze intelligence out of that data can then use the data to control our economic, social, cultural, political systems. And that is the problem. So what happens is, first important thing here, AI is not largely based on personal data. It's based on non-personal data. They are not interested in Rachel does so things. They're interested in a person of this age, of this social kind of social connections, who lives in this part of Indonesia, does these things. They are only interested in patterns. They don't give a damn to my name being Parminder. They're interested in a wallet, not in me. The government may be interested in me as a political person in Parminder, but companies are only interested in a wallet, and it's connected to my social activities. Doesn't matter what my name is. If I'm dead, instead of that next day, it's Shavi. So they are not interested in your personal data. They are interested in non-personal data. The fact is today that Google is going to replace cookies. because there's no lot of pressure from personal data protection. They said, I would have cookies which will not have personal data. It will only have type data, type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. They're actually changing cookies. So what is happening, therefore, is that they're going beyond the pale of law, because globally, there is no data law anywhere other than personal data law. Non-personal data is not protected by law. And therefore, they say, let it flow freely. Quickly, again, the business model of this century is old times. The exploitation of developing countries used to be the developing countries were producers of raw material, primary goods. It went to developed countries where manufacturing goods were made. Developed countries had all the mechanical power, the machinery power, the industrial power, and developing countries were not given that power. Technology transfers were not made. So that was the cycle of exploitation. Then came intellectual property. They said, okay, you can manufacture, but I hold the intellectual property and I'll take 40% cut of everything. So it doesn't matter who's manufacturing. You manufacture in India, you consume in India, give me 40% because the intellectual property is mine. Now, even intellectual property is superseded by something new called artificial intelligence or digital intelligence. And the new cycle of exploitation should be understood by you, because you have been a country which has been colonized. We are a country who have been colonized. And we should understand the logic of geoeconomics. Now, what happens is we produce our data. This data immediately, as Colossus was saying, flows abroad. And now what happens? I'll ask you a question. What do you think is an Uber company? Uber is a company. What company is Uber? What do you call it? It's a transport company. It's a, what is it? Aggregator. Looks like I can't touch what this thing is. Aggregator, there could be an aggregator of service providers, urban clap, it could be taxis, it could be farmers. So that's a kind of a company. But so normally if you say, any company, you know what the business they do, no? GE is an industrial corporation. Microsoft is this. What is Uber? Uber is not a transport company because it does not have a car, right? So what is Uber? And I'll quickly go over it. Uber is containing the intelligence of transportation. What is the asset of Uber? Uber today knows in Bali who wants transportation, which area transportation is available, how many drivers have gone to sleep and they'll be up in 6 hours, where there is a cricket match or probably a football match, where there will be increase in traffic, where there is going to be weather conditions which will create problems, where more potholes. They own the transport intelligence of a city. They are monopolizers of transport intelligence. And whoever holds the intelligence of a sector, unlike intellectual property earlier, takes the biggest part of the cake. Same way, Amazon as an e-com company is an owner of intelligence of e-commerce. Who's producing, where the logistic providers, what time people consume goods, what time their doors are open, etc. They act like a brain of the company. And I call these corporations as brain corporations or intelligence corporations. So unless now this is very funny. You are sitting in the middle of a phenomenon which nobody wants to talk about and you don't understand. Have you questioned it? Why? Because they don't want you to know who extracts what on which logic, because once you start to know it, you would want your part. And that's the problem here. And the simple question is, there is data about this group. This group, some people are writing, some people are typing, some are, snoring. There is actually this data. Zoom knows these kind of data when we hold a Zoom meeting. And every moment you do a Zoom meeting, Zoom is getting more intelligent about people. What do the people do in the meetings? What time of the day people do in the meeting? If the meeting is on digitalization, how people react in a meeting. If there is 50 women in a meeting, how do that meeting takes place? Every day is getting more and more intelligent. The question is, while intelligence is the most important thing, which I have said, who should own the data which contributes this intelligence? It's a very simple moral philosophical question that if we as a group are sitting here and doing an interaction, the data about us should somehow be controlled by us. It's a simple moral philosophical argument. Does anybody oppose this argument that somehow collectively the data about our interactions, what people do, some people are slumping in their chairs, some people are writing, some smile, some people are talking longer than others. Every piece of this contributes intelligence. This is a very simple thing that we as a group should own that intelligence. And that is the reason Bali as a city should own their transportation intelligence. Indonesia as a country should own its natural intelligence. A community of patients of a rare disease should own the data about them. So the issue of data and its ownership and its cross-border flows have to be seen in this context. And the last point about we happily saying that, EU is doing it so we can do things.
Yeah.
EU and US have a privacy shield arrangement, which is now being superseded by another arrangement. The data which goes from EU to US has given special protections and access to authorities in US. In EU, they will never give it to others. They're very open to it that privacy shield will never be given to other countries. They're very open about it. When Snowden happened, and you refer to Snowden, two big leaders were known to have had their phones tapped. Many were, but it was known, Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, and President Dilma of Brazil. Both were furious. You'll be surprised to know that US actually gave assurance to President Merkel that her phone will not be tapped. The same assurance was actually not given to President Dilma. So that's the uneven cross-border situation in which you live. So just to say that my data will be more protected from my own government and authoritarian government because it goes to US is something you really, really need to examine. Apart from the fact that there are economic issues involved in cross-border data flow. I'll stop here and happy to answer your question.
Thank you so much. So it's like opening a Pandora box thing. And then we're really lucky that we are able to like discussing this matter because as Parminder said, like this is a very new discourse, CBDF. And as Oli said, we really need to unpacking what do we mean by data, by sovereignty, because this is new and constantly changing concept. And I don't think that this is a zero-sum games when you agree about data localization means that you don't agree with the protection of privacy. It's not. The aim of we are gathering here today is to find how we want to provide recommendations to the DEWG for the just cross-border data flows to making sure that privacy are protected, but also community and people have access to data decentralization so that the commodifications of data is not solely become the power of global North country. And I think it's like ongoing discussions, I believe, and we have several discussions within the sub-working group on educations. And therefore, we want to pick your brain on how we can communicate this constantly changing, not constantly changing, but like very delicate and new discourse to the stakeholders tomorrow, but also having in mind that the next year chairship of G20, India will definitely going to identify cross-border data flows as one of the key priority that they have. So floor is yours. Anyone would like to raise their hand to share thought? Yes. So I have three. Okay, so you can go first. Kindly.
Sure. Can I just sit and talk? Is it okay? Hi, my name is Dr. Kanika Rakha. I work with RIS. I'm here on behalf of RIS as well. I've been working on data issues for a bit. So I just had about 3 comments and 1 question, whichever panelist would like to answer. This is I'm new to data governance research, so maybe you can help me understand. There seems to be, when we discuss digital, not so much of a standoff nature within a conversation that's happening. But every time data comes up, there is a more sort of standoffish nature that comes in, where people are not comfortable discussing data, but are more comfortable discussing digital as a concept. How different are the two really in their understanding or in their perspectives when we study them? 3 comments really on a lot of the points that were mentioned. One was on digital activities. I think you had spoken about the fact that big companies are interested in dominating and taking over digital activities. While I agree conceptually that big companies by their nature would want to take over whatever they can because they are expansionist in their perspective, but it is also true that some good work has been happening. Just sort of wanted to highlight that part as well, because most recently at the T20, I was participating over there, and we got to hear a lot of the work that Google was doing on data sharing, where it was helping SMEs and startups to understand how it can use data for its for the organization's benefit that they were supporting. So there are some channels where this sort of positive trend is also coming up, where big data is being shared by big companies to smaller companies. Second was on data localization. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm new to the subject as well, but no one can stop anyone from collecting data in today's day and age, because we live in sovereign countries. And if I tomorrow want to go to Maharashtra or a state, any other place in the country, and want to collect data, I can figure that data structures out on myself, and data localization can happen for me. So I'm not sure if it is data localization is a problem, especially with SDGs. I know that in India, at least, a lot of work on data localization is happening. Niti Aayog has been doing a lot of work as well. And it seems to be a successful model, at least within India for now. Third was on international data rules. I completely agree with what Parminder pointed out, that when you're not able to agree on something, which means it's the most important area at this point of time. The bigger problem that I find with an international treaty that you were pointing out too, is that not only are individual states now creating their own data models, where they're creating individual laws for their own countries, it's also smaller groupings within the G20 are now looking at different models for themselves, bilaterals or many trilaterals or plurilaterals that are existing. So within this context, to come up with a G20 understanding of CBDF or DFFT would be extremely complicated and tough. And it is a struggle to get all of these things on the table together itself. The other point, the last point, was just on what Parminder said. Sorry for taking the floor. On AI and how it is sort of taking over. As a researcher, I find that to be actually a little helpful sometimes, that if I'm studying data governance, then Google tells me there are 3 other papers on data governance, and that actually benefits me. It helps my work become easier. So not sure if it's completely negative that AI is reading our understanding of what we want from the government, like from the paper, from Google, and trying to help us make our jobs easier for that matter. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Elanto from Combine Indonesia. So regarding the SDGs, we know that there are a lot of social protection program, especially in the global south, and some of them, or maybe most of them, now become digital as well. So I would like to ask a question, maybe for Oli and also Sefi, regarding this development of the datafication in the social protection program that become digital. Could you explain more about the issues of the data justice? If we we know that some of the social protection program, for example, not only social protection program but also social services, basic social services, right now already integrated with the commercial or also corporate platform. So I would like to ask to Parminder as well. Is there any data intelligence issues as well when the basic social program or basic social protection program data already connected to the commercial platform? Because, for example, in Indonesia, some of the social protection program, they have some services connected to the banking platform, for example, and also another corporation or commercial platform. So that's my question. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sonal Mehta and I'm from IPPF South Asia region based in Delhi. And I'm one of those frustrated social scientists where data protection rules are used to control data, which you cannot really, in name of data protection, social science studies are controlled, whereas all the commercial users use data as and when they want to. So my question actually, and this is more out of curiosity, maybe what's wrong if Google sends me white shirts, if that's what I'm looking for anyway? And would it really make sense to just have, and I completely understand countries wanting to hold their data, but often I see that governments use that rule to control civil society or smaller people, and commercial people anyway use it. They find a way to use it however they want to. And so I'm really have come to a stage, maybe disillusion, and say, just lift all the rules of data protection. I'm just curious about that and would like to hear something.
And I also would like to really encourage participants online to type their questions. So if anyone online would like to ask, or perhaps just sharing thoughts to add the conversations, feel free to do so. But I would like to firstly requesting responses. Safi or Parminder first? Because
starting from Anita's to Sonal's question, and both are social scientists, and they are future responsible on the behalf of the society for the future of the society, if I am not wrong, as social scientists. I see such a fatalism, which I do not know where it comes from. And if it comes from our not having invested in depth or what needs to be invested, I think we should look there rather than look at narrow interest fatalism, which also has its place on the table. But you are responsible for projecting the future of the society, its power relationships, and its justness and fairness. And I think you need to place your questions within that. I'm sorry if I'm sounding blunt, but that's the problem. Now, of course, every company does good. How would a company, even the companies in, I don't know, Hitlerian regime, they were doing some good, otherwise they wouldn't be companies. So to count to say, no, Google also helps me, therefore, so what happens with the power equation? It doesn't shock you at all that Google can today, I tell you the national security, and I use the example from Uber. India's non-personal data does not have a law. I'm a part of the Chris Gopalakrishnan committee, which has made some framework. Today, you know a concept called smart bombs. Smart bombs, and I deliberately use this term, are not dumb bombs which are just dropped over a city. They will try to maximize impact through like 500 parts of that bomb, all of which have a brain, and they try to hit the most damaging parts of a city. Do you know that the data which Uber has, non-personal data, can directly be taken, and I'm deliberately giving a very hard example, can be taken by Pentagon to make a smart bomb? Because it will actually tell which parts of Delhi or Bali at which parts of the day and week are most densely populated, where the elites go, where the money is, where the politicians are, that everything goes in a brain, and that brain can go into the bomb. And I think that also needs to be looked at when you look at the 5 questions which Google tells you. Both are important and they have to be weighed on a scale. And one parallax, wrong impression is that technology was invented by Google. I'm sorry, Google was basically, you all know, working on American taxpayers' money when they made their search engine. All basic research is done by those people who were working from. So just to say that, just because I'm sorry, I don't understand technology, therefore Google somehow is the owner and God of technology is not a fact. If Google was not there, there would still be such engines. And let me say that possibly better such engines, because there would be competition. So first of all, you have to remove this parallaxes from your mind. This is wrong epistemologies, what technology is, who gives us technology, how it works, what is just fair, etc. I'm sorry, I'm known to be blunt, but this is much of the answer to your questions. Once you start doing it, you will start getting it right. The problem is the disciplines are not laid out. There's nobody who really understanding, just ever saying, simple thing is not known that Uber is a company which is a brain company. Uber is owner of not transportation or not a platform. It is owner of intelligence of transportation of a city. Nobody is even getting into it. Nobody individual researchers' fault the disciplines have not been developed, and we need to be contributing to that. So that's big answer. Data, digital, you know, why they like to talk digital. Digital is confused enough not to be, you know, feel bad about talking. So when you're talking digital, you can talk anything, right? When you're at data, you have become too narrow and you have to be specific, and people don't know about data. And that's they don't want to talk about it. And that's the standard of it. Digital, I'll start talking about my grocer. I'll talk about my village who's trying to get some welfare services. I can talk 500 things under digital. So people are ready to talk digital, not about data, because then data is very specific and people don't know about what the hell data is about. I've jumped a lot of things, international data list. Yeah, again, the G20 difficulties are there. But don't you understand that people say, I talk about data ownership. No, ownership is not a good word. You know, it's a non-rival good. Why are you using that word? I said, when people came and used property for intellectual property, nobody objected. Exactly the same thing, right? Why didn't they call it intellectual resources, IRs? They knew what is a powerful word. Property. Then you didn't talk about it. When I, on the behalf of poorer countries and poorer people, am pushing a strong word, ownership says, no, it doesn't look good. But why did property look good? Because it's as non-rival knowledge as data is non-rival, but property and ownership are connected terms. So it's a capture of narrative. So let's see the interests of people whom we represent and push the narrative in that direction rather than the opposite direction. And those difficulties are there. G20, the difficulties have been created so that you don't do anything. You have to fight against those difficulties. Says, no, it's pretty simple. That's what I'm saying. It's pretty simple. I use the word. Now, here there are concepts. It's not about data localization. It's about bringing data under rule of law. Immediately the narrative changes, right? Same thing. There's no difference. But you can't oppose rule of law. Localization you can oppose because it looks bad, because you are a trans-global elite, which has very different interests than 90% of poor people who hardly ever move out of the district. What to say, go global. But since the narrative is dominated by a transnational, globally trotting elite, they don't like the word localization, which I don't understand. Even his last slide was localized to Indonesian language for whatever reason it was, right? And again, then they say data free flow with trust. Trying to solve your kind of problems. Developing countries are neither able to sign on that concept, they're refusing, nor they have other concept. So in the end, we have come up with it. We say data flow with data rights. And we say all 3 generations of data rights have to be included, because in societies, when all 3 generations are applied, why not to data? So we came up with a concept. The name of this paper is Cross-Border Data Flow with Data Rights. So it's a job of, because they will bring up concepts, and you don't have an answer, politician. So you bring up concepts to push them back. There's one picture here which balances on a balancing scale. One side is privacy and other side is a loaf of bread. The loaf of bread says that economic rights are as important as other rights. So this has to be constructed by us and to respond back. So I'm sorry, I'll cut it, but Elanto has talked about, there is a lot of data with commercial platforms, which is needed for social protection. By the way, 30 years back, who was the repository of the largest amounts of data about a society? Governments are normally repositories of biggest data. And that was the big power of statehood. You're not understanding that the state is losing its power, because today the biggest repository of data are commercial companies. And slowly the power is being sucked out of the state. Now, liberal to neoliberal activists further say that the state should not do anything with data, therefore ensuring that the state will be dead, basically. Because today, if you're not datafied, you're dead, right? So that's a big problem. So the kind of things you are talking about, and this concept is being used in EU and India, this concept called data infrastructures. Some data are considered like roads, bridges, ports, as common thing, which everybody can apply on. And using that, the private companies are forced or mandated to give their data into a data infrastructure. And that can be used by everybody. And you are right, you will not have welfare services soon unless you have to have access to the data, which is largely with the commercial platforms. I'm sorry, Rachel, I took almost as long as my previous intervention.
I just want to highlight key points then, Parminder. I think we have to I think you and Mas always mention about the use of non-personal data and aggregates for the community, and how the transfer of technology need to be centered to the global South countries. While I think Shafi mentioned about the privacy protections for personal data. So I think we need to kind of like making sure that when we communicate it to the EW, there is like these very particular particularities, so that we don't make privacy and economic justice to the data industry to be polarized options, if that makes sense.
Actually, last decade in this paper, researchers will know, indivisibility of rights. People, the West came and told that freedom of expression and civil and political rights are important. And then South came, no, economic and social and cultural rights are as important. And there is no hierarchy of rights. So these are known concepts. So what you are saying is precisely that. So there are books and books about there is no hierarchy of rights, there is invisibility of rights. A poor serf who's dependent on a landowner for his bread has no freedom of expression, because that guy has to go to that field to work daily. There's no freedom of expression, even if there's so-called freedom of expression. So the indivisibility of right, what you're talking about, is important. However, currently, if you ask people, everybody understands there is privacy, and the other side is less understand. So if I talk more about that side, this is only because the other side is less important, less understood. I have no doubt that actually people said they're equal level, but I understand civil and political rights come first, economic and social cultural come second. Though actually people, they say they are same. But I'm even ready to say they are superior. But even at least here that there are economic rights around data. If you just catch a person on the corridor and ask economic rights about data, say, what are you talking
It's
about?
like very nuanced. Yeah, and then also, sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversations, but I think your point, Parminder, about like Uber and also Mas Olisias on how this big tech is really controlling the data, highlighted gap within our recommendations, because we have not included that we request accountability of the big tech on their harmful business models, because internet is cover a benefit of the digitalizations, but also this big tech that using personal and non-personal data for their own marketing, which some extent even influence the elections result, have not been called accountable. And this is also something that perhaps can be included within the recommendations, on top of the economic justice part, because it can be harmful. So I think I'll stop there and perhaps asking Shafi to give additional thoughts, because there are also a lot of questions about, finding balance to also highlighting how some of the initiatives has been done, and what concept of the artificial intelligence that need to be embedded to making sure that human rights are protected.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Rachel. I think from the three questions before, I have like about 3 points that I really want to address and answer on that. The first thing, I don't know if it makes sense or not, but I think it's a good idea to differentiate the approach of personal data and non-personal data when we talk about the cross-border data flows, because it's require a different protection. So how can we approach the non-personal data such as the aggregate data and also anonymization data? I think it will be different when we transfer the such data, when we like, what should I call, like, in the other hand, this is important for the communities and some kind like that for this data. But on the other hand, when we talk about the personal data, I think we should give really put more concern about the personal data protection, because this is a personal data. But regarding the non-personal data, I agree that it can be benefit by the collective thing and some kind like that. So I don't know if it makes sense or not to different that kind of the data, because I'm afraid that the DEWG will like combine this kind of data, because it really need a different approach on that, I believe. But I don't know, Mas Always and also Parminder can talk more about that. Because I saw that there is like two different discussion on that. So it's important for us to how can we differentiate two of that data and how we should protect those two kind of data. And the second one is actually, yes, I believe that we cannot stop to collecting the data, but we knew that there are so many, some kind of the effect on and also impact of the data collection, especially for the personal data. So this is require really high data protection, especially for the sensitive data when the government collected or transfer that across the country. And also about this is the social protection program and how it can transfer to one platform to another. I believe that the interoperability of data is one of our rights. So it's important to address that, Mas Elanto from Combine. But as we know that how the infrastructure and also the regulation and legislation on the protection of personal data is, I believe that will really important to address first, because we believe that the social protection is also our right. And I also agree with Parminder, there is no like the leveling of human rights. All of the human rights is the rights that we hold as a human being. So it's important for us to address all of the human rights according to the right to privacy and also right to economic and the other rights. I think I'll just stop there, but Bang Alis can add more on that. Sorry? Yeah.
Sorry, intervening. You are aware, some of you are aware that my name is Amod Kant, and I carry my. I don't think it's working. Stop. You again, Is it okay? Huh? Can you hear now?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Amod Kant. I'm here on behalf of Vani, which is going to take over the presidency next in India. I'm the executive of Vani, and I'm the founder of an organization called Prayas, which operates nationally in India. And with regard to data only, I have got some point I thought I'll clarify. I worked as a policeman. I was chief of police of 2 states in India I was there for 34 years. So two kinds of data which come to my mind, whose security and whose usability is an issue. Number one, that in terms of, as a voluntary organizations, we have nearly 100,000 children and youth who come to our program as victims of many crimes, okay? Or they come as juveniles also, the offenders. And we are connected to National Crime Records Bureau in India. There's a national repository of crimes and victims of crimes. So that kind of information we carry within our system. And then there are a lot of questions being asked whether that data we can keep with ourselves and how much we can share. That is one point. Second point is that my organization, which employs about 700 people, and we have over 200 centers, most of them are implementing programs with regard to education, with regard to health, with regard to vocational training. And then annually about maybe 100,000 such beneficiaries, their data comes to us and they remain with us as a voluntary organization. So the point I was trying to mention that these two different types of data, what are the laws prevalent globally? I can repeat. One, data is about the victims of crimes, social crimes particularly, like trafficking, like child labor, like sexual abuse, those kinds of victims, and accused also, the offenders. And the second is the beneficiaries of, let's say, various schemes of the government. These two data we play with. We have got that kind of data. Any comments on that?
Okay. Okay. Oh, so sorry, I must always cut you off about the response, but I would like to give the floor to the gentleman next to you for raising your comments or questions before I would like to request Mas Olis to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, but Rachel. My name is Eng. I'm currently associated with Save the Children. So here I'm maybe I'm more interested in your opinions and thoughts or the behind the scene when you formulate the recommendations for the DEWG. On the chair of the working group itself, that is considered even in his country as an incompetent ICT ministry. So how can you, maybe you have a sort of discussion behind the scene, how can you give policy recommendations regarding data rights and also about the data flows when the leader himself is not, or maybe couldn't be more indifferent about data privacy? Thank you.
Really great questions, and I would like Mas Olis to respond on that. I think Mas Olis already have like fully prepared to respond.
No, because there are some questions. Actually, Parminder and Sifa already giving an answer, but sorry. Yeah, but I would like to respond the questions. I mean, for the discussions about the several things here, like frustrating about the protection data. I mean, I have an opinion about there is a different thing between people living in the oppressed country and from a more a democratic country. In oppressed country, like what I have experienced several more than 20 years living, data protections, data privacy is nothing. Even the government officer, they know than me who I am, because that's happened. So for the people living in that situation, the data protection, the data privacy, it will have a different meaning and different perspective. So that's why when we have discussed between the peoples, and that they don't really care. I mean, many of Indonesian, I mean for the intellectual, not for the common people, for the intellectual even, they don't care about their data. So this is a big challenge also in the society. Because as long as I don't get hurt, that's what they say. Directly, they have no problem with that. They don't care if that giving advantage to the company or etc. and etc. and etc. So that's a big challenge that when I discuss in the roots with some intellectual, but some they know about the privacy, but it's theoretically. Yes, it's because it's me presenting me and etc. But because they don't hurt you. So I mean, that's what some experience. I hope this response can give you another perspective about the data protections. I mean, so, but that's different. If you talk about someone from Europe or someone in America, they'll be angry with that, really, deeply, but not what can I say in Indonesian? Should I? That's one thing. Another thing is about the localization. The localization have a big challenge. I mean, in the digital technology, they can do anything. That's a big challenge. Last year in Indonesia, the Google, they have a launch that they have agreed with the government to make a local servers for Indonesians. What does it mean? If you make rules of localization, they will say, yes, this is a localization. It's just only a transfer within the company. Your data is here. But who have the data? Who control it? Who have the data? Who control the data? Who make it in the term of artificial intelligence? They change it in seconds as a set of data, and then they can do. Yeah, yeah, that's it. But the problem then That's about the rules. That's about the rules of law. But the problem is that's about another about the data, because the data is quite different. That's one thing about related to the Googles, how they do that. And the other things, I would like to respond to the facilitation of social services, public services.
I made the same point, social service.
Yes.
Because the millions and millions of beneficiaries.
Yes, of course.
On the government side, on the one hand, the entire data is there, and people like
Yes.
us, the voluntary organizations or others.
Yeah,
and the
okay.
individual, their own information is in the public domains on the line in the government book.
Okay. What we see, especially in the developing country, digitalization is a big opportunity to facing that problem for public services. Like in Indonesia, that's happened a lot for the registrations and for many things. They do accelerate the facilitation, this public services. That's not happened in 20, 70 years before, but they make it only in 1 or 2 years. So it's very fast. But then the problem is, that's what I always say, that it's like a sword. They have two edges. One is they give them beneficiaries, of course, but the other side, when you have no control about it, then you cannot do anything. When you do if you want to make a regulation, when you make a program to developing, who have the data? So that's another thing. So what can I say to be, for me, as an umbrella about this is about, I like to use a word of hegemony. So this will be a global hegemony. If you talk about the local, colonializations, so they will go like that. Everything you think, trend, even the future you plan. So I think maybe last things. Thank you.
Thank you. But before I give the floor to Sefi and Parminder, I think I would like to give a slightly different view from Mas Olis, because privacy, right, for me, is caters towards everyone, not only those who are coming from the US or EU country. Because according to Forum Asia Human Rights Defenders report, 70% of online doxing, intrusion of privacy, will lead to physical intimidations and violations. And this is really concerning issues for the journalists in the regions, women human rights defenders, those who has been at the forefront of civic movement. And I believe that there's also like growing understanding on the importance to safeguard privacy, especially those who are coming from marginalized communities such as LGBTIQ, who are being persecuted across the globe. Yeah, I just, sorry, I should not say this, but yeah, I just want to say like different view, perhaps to kind of like make it more holistic, and also reflecting on the internal discussions that we have within the sub-working group. And I believe that Parminder want to also say something in response to the questions, and Sefi perhaps can address the question about how the process of making the recommendations, because you've been doing that in the past few months. So Parminder, would you mind?
Yeah, I think, and this is a very important discussion actually. So the difference, Rachel, between you and Ulysses is not that, and I disagree with Ulysses like you, that it's not that Europeans become more angry, we become less angry. Chevy talked about interoperability right. One of the most important rights in GDPR was that I can take my data out and give it to somebody else. Do you know how many people have done it in the last 4 years? Almost none. It's very little use of interoperability. I'll tell you why. And that's a bigger problem. And that goes to Anita's question and Sonal's question also. The problem is somewhere else. Somebody has told us both the problem is individual and the response is individual, while the problem is considerably collective and the response is collective. And the hegemony is of a different kind, a philosophical, political hegemony, which tells and individualizes problems and individualizes responses. Both the LGBT guys and the marginalized guys, and the economic dimensions. So we are told, and then they come up with individual responses. They say, oh, well, we have given you rights, there's a portability rights, you can withdraw the data from Google and give it to somebody else. The GDPR came 4 years back. There's negligible use of data portability by anyone. Who does that kind of thing? You guys do it? You, Rachel, who's an activist of privacy, how many times have you really done anything about your personal data? I, who knows a lot about data, has done it. Because let's get over it. There are known social theories of social human behavior. People don't behave like that. When I'm in a hurry to get my services, I just get my services. And there's nothing wrong in it. That's how human beings are. When the response is collective, it has to be collective. I mean, I keep on hearing in India, for example, everybody criticizes private schools and tuitions. But they all send their kids to tuitions because they don't want the kids to fail, which is very normal. But if they collectively decide, they will say there should be no tuitions, right? That's the difference. Of course, nobody is not going to pull their own kid from a tuition, right? In the same way, you are not going to play with your own data, but if you collectively get together and decide, you will say certain practices are not to be done. So the difference here is not between the individual rights and collective rights. It's a construction of politics of individual responses and collective responses. And the West has given us an hegemony that everything has been individualized. The hurt is individualized and the response is individualized. Colonization, when colonization came, were not people benefiting? Monetization was introduced. Commercial farming was introduced. A lot of people were making money. A lot of people were benefited. Railways were made. Weren't they benefiting? If I start counting benefits of colonization, people were. But there were those visionaries in Indian freedom movement and in Indonesia who said, no, no, you may be benefiting. There is a structure being constructed around you, which is detrimental. And we can still have railway lines and we can still have monetization and commercial farming, but can be done on our own terms. So the problem between Rachel and Olis's discussion is not, which looks like individual rights versus collective rights. It is not. It's the construction of politics, whether it's an individual thing or a collective thing, which is a problem. Rachel talks about privacy rights. I don't see how privacy rights can be saved without localization. Or the fact that US would never give you the guarantees it gives EU. This is known. This is official. They clearly say, I will not give privacy shield to any other country than EU. What are you going to do about it? So this is nothing about privacy versus collective things. It's about the fact that, and a lot of people, the kind of comment you have made, this gentleman has made, a lot of people said, no, no, I don't want to get government to data. And because we are at a transformational new social contract moment. And I asked them the question about whether government should have anything to do with data or not. I said, okay, let's say there are tribal communities where no law has ever reached. Do you want to establish a police station there or not? Here's the policeman sitting here. Now, there's a problem. If you establish a police station, the local landlords are going to use police station to further dominate those people. This is a fact. But the same police station is going to save some women, some children, and many other people. So if I have to ask you a yes or no question, should I put a police station there or not? What would you say? Yes, because I think it is yes. But we will do the human rights thing, the supervision of that police station. That's a different development to do. In the same way, data has to be localized. My privacy battles cannot be fought by the US Congress. They have to be fought by my own country. I have to improve my country. But I cannot therefore shift the rule of law to some other country. That's the difference debate. The difference is not between privacy and economic rights here. The difference is about politics. One, individual versus collective responses. Two, my politics versus some good countries having good politics. Same country, which is big champion of privacy, is the one who was recording Chancellor Merkel's phones and President Dilma's phones and like many countries' phones. So the questions are somewhat different here.
Global players. In the world of data, the global players are very, very important. And you are talking about national data flowing all over.
So the international treaties are important, therefore.
Local controls or the local level management of the data, control of data, and the individual's privacy and data operations are very important.
So if I add to this, have you heard of a word called edge computing? How many people have heard of the word edge computing? Even the multinationals today say that I will keep the data close to the point of generation. This is called edge computing. The new thing about computing is edge computing. They said, I will not take data from your phone. Your personal data stays on the phone. I'll just pick up insights. That's called edge computing or distributed learning. So what is different between edge computing and localization? It's the same. The data stays closest possible to the point of its origination because it helps retain control with the point of originator, the data subject. Same thing as data localization, but certain Western narratives have constructed the data localization word you heard, you are a backward looking Luddite. That's not true.
Thank you so much. I think I have two things to say. The first one is following up from the Mbak Rachel perspective on the personal data. And I agree with Mbak Rachel regarding that, because we know that all the sector, public sector, private sector, really passionate about collecting the data. All of the sector, they collect many of the data, our data, our behavior data is also personal data, right? Like when we use the Instagram or anything like that, and they record our behavior data, and that's personal data that also should be addressed in this discussion. So, but unfortunately, all the sector did not give a really good perspective in the personal data protection. They only knew about how to collect the data, but don't know about how the infrastructure should build, how the regulation and legislation. And on the other hand, the government, for the example, Indonesia, they only make the regulation that really support them to collect the data. For the example, is MR5 that address the private sector should register themselves for that. And it already showed that, for the example, in 2016, Indonesian government have a regulation to register all the SIM cards. And lately there is a data breach on that. And what happened, and also what the government do on that? There is nothing government can do. So this is the things that I really want to say, that the government has always reluctant on the data breach, always half-hearted response and backpassing on that. And the things in Indonesia, for the example, the government does not tackle the root of the problem. The government's response thus far are limited to only, the first one is the blocking of sites and or accounts that hack the systems. And it really violates the freedom of expression. And the second one is the investigation, but one that is not transparent and accountable. And the third one is frequent backpassing among relevant bodies or agencies. I don't know how it does in the other country, but we don't have a really good infrastructure and also regulation and legislation on that. So that's why we're really afraid when the data was collected by the government, at least for me and for some as my organizations. So we believe that the data should be controlled directly by us as the subject data, because it's why we call the data is like in our legislation and our advocacy, we say that we say that we are subject data, not data holder or data owner, because there is a different regime on that. We would like to control the data. And also regarding the process of making a recommendations that Mas Anggi have asked before, the first one, of course, we create a policy brief with the Indonesian team, such as the Indonesian Global Justice and also ALSAM and TIFA and several friends of us. And after we combine all of the idea of that, we do a global consultation of that. And after that, we hear from other perspective from the other of the countries, such as Parminder and also the other organizations outside Indonesia, and we combine that in the updating one of the policy brief. And after that, of course, we consult more about that with the specific team on that, on the policy recommendations, and transform that into the three main recommendation on that, Mas Anggi. I think that's all from me.
Much, Saifi. So time check, we have 20 more minutes. So I wonder if we can get responses from the participants here. Okay, go ahead, please. Thank you, Mas.
I'm Harsh Jaitley from Vani. Actually, I'm that type of person who has learned digital technology as a part of adult education. So we are all been scared of this technology. But I just wanted to share. I've got motivated after listening this debate and discussion. So I'm asking one simple thing. I'm sharing one simple thing that you must have seen that during the period of COVID, in India, we have our government did immunization or vaccination of, I think I'm very bad in millions. It is 1.4 billion. Kitna hai India's population? 1.4 billion people almost. They have been very systematically, given vaccination, 3 dose. Then also at that time, we faced massive economic crisis. So at that time also, along with civil society, our government distributed basic health facility, food, those monetary benefit, direct transfer of funds. What I'm saying so is that many times we use digital technology for the benefit of the community. But this fear of data, stealing makes us so scary that even we are not able to use that with the technology, which has lots of potential to do the common good, we are not able to use that. So I just wanted to know that it is very important that because all other structures of conversation globally are not that much effective as we have G20. Can we take up this issue and solve this problem for the future? Because COVID has given us many lessons. This is one of that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for highlighting that there's also good in internet. There's also good in data collections. So final responses, perhaps, before I will give back the floor to the speakers here for final remarks. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm Nidhi Goyal from India, from the disability rights groups in India, civil society there, founder and executive director of an organization called Rising Flame. It's very interesting to talk about digitization in the new age, particularly because for persons with disabilities, digitization or digital technology has brought accessibility and independence, which was lacking in the physical infrastructure. What, just as a comment to bring in is, while thinking about digitization, privacy, and security, if we can also add the conversation of universal access, which the disability movement has been bringing forth, but is useful for population overall. So just to give you a small example of universal access is the vibration mode on cell phones, for example, was designed for deaf and hard of hearing folks, but it is now used for everyone. So technology to be, or apps or websites or internet to just be working on universal access principles, on the accessibility guidelines, that becomes an issue. And why when that's not available, what happens is even simple, everything from banking transfers, right? Sir, I think Parminder sir was talking about data and data mining and privacy and security around that. But what really happens is when accessibility is not in line with digitization or is not prioritized within our digitization efforts as much as privacy and security, for persons with disabilities, even a simple bank transfers becomes somewhere where they have to enable access to someone else. So let go of their privacy, invite someone in their very private space of just using a credit card with the technology that we have of touchscreen, of banking and so on. So, and even surveillance-free communication becomes a barrier. So we were talking about many platforms in COVID that we became like a digital connected world, but except Zoom and one or two platforms, they were not accessible. So thinking about accessibility or universal access becomes at the heart of our digitalization and privacy conversation. So this is my submission.
Thank you so much, Ms. Goyal. And I also would like to bring us back the key highlights of the sub-working group on digitalizations, because actually we are not only focusing on the just cross-border data flows, but also accessibility in terms of how it needs to be catering the diverse needs of people with disability, but also addressing the technology gap in urban and rural settings, as well as access to women and marginalized group. We also talk about free knowledge on how content creations of knowledge need to be liberalized, to making sure that people from the global south also have have similar access to other G20 members. And also we talk about how digitalizations need to be fostering the pandemic responses. So this is something that I think we will keep discussing, especially given the upcoming India chairship that might also discuss the issues further. And with that, I actually would like to request all the speakers here to give final comments. I know that this is still an ongoing discussion, but I'm really grateful that we are able to kind of having an amicable discussions, understanding that this is a very intricate and also evolving concept. And we will do our best to include key discussions that we have here to the communications with the EWG tomorrow. Mas Olis, may I start with you?
All right, thank you. Yes, for the first, I would like to say that what I'm trying to do here is to open the black box. So the Pandora box, because
Box of good sweets.
I mean, sometimes we see it's like a small things, and then, you know, like we see the star. Star is nice. It's a small thing, but when we know that there are unlimited things, so there are space is unlimited. I mean, so sometimes it comes like that. I just trying to open the communication like that. That what I'm trying. Like what happened in Indonesia, we have a privacy data bills protecting, but we have to realize that that's not enough. It's because it's growing and growing. It's what we discuss is not against the human rights, but also if you talk about ECOSOC and extra, so we have to fulfill that also. So I mean, this is wider, and for the years, then we can facing more things to facing on. So I think in India, I think I mean I would like to some historical that in Italy, they don't have a digitalizations. They have a civic rights, but now the recommendation from the Italy, they say that digitalization, it should be have a more space in the G20, the C20 groups. So I think they become wider. When our discussions in the first years when we start the C20, we realize that the digitals is a cross-cutting issue. In every working groups, they will talk about the digitalization, SDGs, anti-corruption, gender, tax. Every working groups, they will. So yes. So I mean,
Even the social legislations and crimes.
yes, yes. So this is become a big issue. So of course we cannot take it all, but we need the times to keep fighting, because otherwise we will get harms, or people will get harmed. I mean that's the point that we can go. Thank you.
There are few points, but going to the heart of it, what Mr. Harsh said, in G20, can we solve it? So we are a few stages before solving it. It's like a game has to start, but before a game starts, the rules of the game are made, right? What is a foul? What is allowed? What is not allowed? Right now, we are setting the rules of the game and the terms of the talk. Solving is like next 30, 40 years. But right now, the problem is, what are the rules of the game, right? Would you just have privacy, or there's an economic issue? If data is valuable, then why don't I have a share of the value? So it's a rules of the game level thing. And our understanding that rule of law is important for this, whether it's personal thing or it's a structural thing. Is just an individualized response or a collective response. These are the rules of the game. The vocabulary is being developed. Shivi said, and Anita's also said, data can be collected by everyone. So we have this fatalism about it. There are many things people can do it. Robbery and theft is taking place all over the world, every time. But there's a law which stops it. If you are caught, you will go to the jail. Child pornography, you can't stop it, right? But there's a law against it. So we need to get out of this fatalism. If we make laws against data issues, You can do it. The day you are caught, your CEO goes in jail for 2 years, you'll know what happens then. Things get changed. So don't have this fatalism that, how can, I have a lot of people said, how would you localize, people will send out data. I said, it's very simple. The CEO goes to jail for 6 months. You see what happens then. It's very simple. That's what insider trading in US, it's a very simple thing. If I pick up a phone and give you information of shares, who can stop it? But once you come to know, you know what happens with insider trading in US. And people really, really go to jail for that. So G20 should set the vocabulary for it. And that's why we came up with the word data free flow with trust. We said data flow with data rights. I want to ask the EU, are you against data rights? You are not? Let's then use that term. And you'll be surprised. And I keep on talking about economic rights and you still think, what the hell are these things? We work with traders who are on Amazon. I'm a part of the group of traders who are losing their shops. They're closing their shops. Their merchandise values, everything is coming down because the terms of trade are uneven. The data which is taken from the traders is then used by Amazon to make goods which are in competition with the guy who originally made it. Now, whether that data should belong to the guys whose good they were or the platform which collected is an economic data rights. This is happening with farmers. It happens with Uber drivers. So these are real economic rights and we are involved. I'm involved with farmers. I'm involved with app-based drivers. I'm involved with traders groups who have big problem with Amazons and Flipkarts of this world. So they are real things with real people. So again, it's the PD versus the personal data versus non-personal data. These differentiations are important. They are happening. By the way, anybody who is in advanced levels of this discussion should go and study a new draft legislation in Europe, which is called Health Data Space Regulation. You'll be surprised. The same EU which tells you about cross-border data flows and don't do things. The law is very clear. Almost every kind of data, health data, has to be mandatorily shared to few spaces. These spaces are managed by governments, agencies. Access to that data is available against something which looks like the last century term, data permits. It's a permit-based access to data. All data has to be mandatorily shared by private owners of data. The data is controlled by public health authorities. The data is shared by public authorities. So all these things which they tell you don't do is at the heart of, it's normal because if health services have to be survived, then there has to be health intelligence, which has to be commonly owned. So yeah, Nidhi Goyal talked about universal access. Yes, those are elements of rule of law, which looks after the interest of all groups. But I think first we need to establish the fact that there's a rule of law. You can't, just because you have collected data, the data doesn't become yours. Some kinds of data are public goods. And then collectively we'll allocate resources and, reservations and benefits, etc., to different groups, and there the universal access also becomes a part of it. So again, I'm just going back to it, but I think data problems will be solved, but right now the rules of the game is important, and the rules of game should make it clear that their individual rights, their collective rights, their individual responses, their collective responses. Nations are still the center of global rule making. I'm happy to have a global parliament. They aren't there, right? So right now where the rule of law is where the rule of law over data would also be. So these are some basic facts of the field. Once we get them right, then we can start playing.
Thank you, Parminder. And I think it's last from me. I believe that this is a continuous discussion like what Bang Olive mentioned before. And I believe that we are also in the same page to defend our human rights, including right to privacy, right to economics, and other rights of this discussion. And also, it's important for us to discuss more about the term because there's so many different terms that we use. And I think it's also important to have a further discussion on this cross-border data flows. And also, I also believe that there should be a different approach of such data regarding to its sensitiveness or its vulnerability or some kind like that, because we cannot see the data as as one thing. Yes, should be categorized by its, yeah. And the last thing is also the inclusiveness and also multi-stakeholder approach are important to address this issue, because the marginalized group also should be included in this discussion, because there are so many different effect and discrimination on the processing of the data. So I think that's important, and that's all from me, Rachel. And thank you, Bangolis and Parminder, for give so comprehensive thing in this cross-border data flows.
Thank you so much to all of the speakers. Can we give a big applause to them? We believe as the next step tomorrow during our interactions with the WG members and also stakeholders from around the world, we will make sure that the essence of discussions here on the importance of data categorizations, the importance of protection of economic justice, economic rights, as well as privacy, and to also see that data open up opportunity and possibilities to excel is being included. And with that, I also would like to inform you that if you go outside, there is a printed versions of our policy recommendations. So feel free to grab it, or you can also get it online in C20 website. And with that, I would like to officially close the sessions. Thank you for being with us. Thank you also for the online participants that has been joining from around the world. And I wish you great sessions after this, and stay safe. Thank you.
There is a policy.